what do I even say? This year's been busy. The uploads on this channel are probably a telling sign of that. I usually just post whatever I feel like, but I don't know, I just haven't had that many ideas lately. But I've been doing these yearly anime videos for a while, so that's at least something, right? Usually I start these videos by mentioning a few series from the year before that I finished this year but couldn't put in the previous year's video, but this year there's only one of those, and it's Skip and Loafer. How do I even describe Skip and Loafer? Skip and Loafer is a sort of series that I like calling a faith in humanity series, where it has an overall warm and inviting feel about it. The main character is the kind of person that wants to see the good in everyone, and things play out relatively peacefully compared to other series that focus on more interpersonal drama. Which isn't to say that there isn't any conflict in this series, but that its antagonistic characters cause relatively less problems and tend to be swayed by the other's goodwill. It's the kind of series that prioritizes sweet, heartwarming moments of people recognizing the good in each other, so I have no choice but to say it's peak. Alright, and now we can move on to this year's anime, I say while looking over a comically long script. Oh my goodness. Hime-sama, Gomon no jikan desu. Or, 'tis time for torture, princess. I think I gotta explain this. So here's how it starts, right? Our main character is a princess who fought in battle against another kingdom, but then was captured in order to have information about her kingdom tortured out of her. But the actual methods of torture go against what you normally expect, and end up always being lighthearted things, like eating delicious food in front of her, or playing fun video games in front of her, etc, etc. The condition being that she can join in on whatever's going on if she reveals some sort of information. The princess and her sentient sword usually do some bragging about how esteemed she is and how she won't relent, but at some point she caves in and reveals some useless secret, and this works anyways as she gets to join the fun. And you quickly get an understanding that this is less of an actual means of progressing the bigger plot that they've set up, and more that it's instead just so we can see the princess enjoy the little things in life. They go so far as to have the princess herself point out every now and again that while she had a somewhat fun childhood, it gradually got replaced with a sense of duty over time. And so we see several people quote-unquote torture the princess for information, but they're all just different varieties of helping her lighten up and enjoy things. The person in charge of the kingdom she got captured by, the Demon King himself, is revealed to just be a sweet guy, and sometimes we'll cut to these scenes of him taking care of this kid or giving encouraging advice to his subordinates while still keeping up the evil persona. And if that's not charming to watch, I don't know what to tell you. The setting is played sort of loose, to the point that some torture sessions are just full-on trips to fun places, but I found myself surprisingly alright with that. It's that same sort of relaxed feeling you get when hearing someone ramble about one thing and then it kind of turns into another, but everyone's having fun, so it feels welcome anyways. Lots of elements in this series seem to prioritize whimsy and wholesomeness above all else, and I personally can't go against that. Like, if you were to try to define my tastes, I'd say it's tough to go wrong with some feel-good media. Oh, and I also can't forget to mention the sentient sword's voice acting. His deliveries landed really well a lot of the time. Dungeon Meshi, or Delicious in Dungeon. It took me embarrassingly long to start watching Dungeon Meshi. I'd heard nothing but praise for it from those who had read or watched it, but I kept thinking I wouldn't like it because it was a fantasy series, a genre I don't often partake in. I thought the terminology and details of its setting would confuse me and hinder my ability to feel invested in it. But after hearing about how endearing its characters were, I tried it out and ended up enjoying it, like a whole lot. The overall way the story plays out is pleasantly straightforward despite its extensive world building, focused on one of its several in-universe dungeons. Funnily enough, it expands on its world while staying mostly within one dungeon by way of its dungeon explorers being a variety of races from across its world. So even though we're mostly seeing the inside of one place, we learn through the characters' reactions to their surrounding peers and scenarios about what their personalities are like. We'll hear specific little facts brought up by this or that character when they encounter something that relates to something they know before having come to the dungeon, and it always feels satisfyingly realistic to hear. The whole story of Dungeon Meshi feels fleshed out in so many ways. There's lots of creative monsters, from living armor to bug coins to animal hybrids to shapeshifters, that then get turned into a variety of interesting meals by Laos's party. Since a lot of the story is about Laos's party on their journey down the dungeon to save one of their members that got eaten by a dragon, most of our time is spent with this party, and they're endlessly delightful and relatable to watch. Like, truly the ideal of a silly yet sincere friend group. All of their personalities bounce off of each other so well and make for lots of great jokes as we see what each of their specific strengths and weaknesses are along the way. They have to solve lots of specific issues together through a mix of careful observation and brute force, so there's lots of interesting scenes where they butt heads over the methods used. And yet they always manage to pull through somehow, with different combinations of them helping each other out. All of this and more makes the moments where their bonds are re-established feel natural and well-deserved. The story even does that thing where another character joins the main group partway through, and the fact that she begins as self-serving before slowly realizing the merits of being part of a group is really sweet. The way each of them are initially only together because of work, but gradually tell each other about their personal lives and moments of trusting each other is also really sweet. Like the whole Senju backstory, don't even get me started, oh my god. I'd just be talking for hours if I mentioned every single thing I like about Dungeon Meshi. What, do you think I'm kidding? The sound effect of wooden utensils scraping food off of the pan, Marcel's general air of anxiety being accompanied with how often she holds her staff close to her, Itsutsumi's slightly raspy cat-like voice, the fact that the mangaka is somehow a picky eater like Itsutsumi is despite the vast degree of dishes shown across the series, the endlessly creative variety in its character designs, the way that Lyles' interest in monsters and lack of reading a room comes in handy in very specific ways, the way that since she's passed with food insecurity and having been fed first among his older peers leads to him prioritizing feeding the group so often, the way that the series' happier moments coincide with its foreboding ones and sort of prepares you for its darker moments because of that, which sort of reminds me of Hatoful Kadashi's juggling of moods, the way that its intentionally clashing moods are shown in the second opening that brings about a slight sense of foreboding along with its general feeling of happiness, the theming of self-care through eating and the several ways that food in general ties into its overall message, the way that it sprinkles in bits of world building and deeper lore throughout the series, and the way that it foreshadows details such as the— Oh yeah, spoilers. I guess I should mention that I started reading the manga partway through watching this, and since the manga is a complete story, I can confidently say that I like the series as a whole, even beyond what the anime is yet to cover. Though I mean that much to be clear with how much I've been appreciating it throughout this whole thing. Even though I initially thought that fantasy series wouldn't align with my tastes, maybe I just needed to expand my palette. Yoru no kurage wa oyogenai. Or, Jellyfish can't swim in the night. Okay, so here's how the story starts. A brunette protagonist who wants to pursue her passion meets a musician with bright hair who recently stopped working with her famous group, and the former lights the latter's spark of inspiration anew as the two resolve to team up, which helps the latter try again at music. They get 2 more members later down the line as well, and make a channel on YouTube to post their songs on. The group consists of the singer Kano, the illustrator Yoru, the song composer Mei, and the video editor Kiwi. Guess which one's my favorite? Sometimes I worry I'm too easy to predict. Yeah, it's the video editor. Though Kiwi also doubles as a VTuber, and their backstory of putting on a heroic act despite being actually sort of cowardly was pretty cool, especially when it came full circle in a later episode where Yoru says that she'd been inspired by that heroism. Inspiration's a pretty big topic in the show. It's what kicks off the group's creation in the first place, and it's what had kept each of its members going even before its creation, as each person had previously been inspired by one of the others in the group. And in the present day, as they create more and more content for their collective channel, inspiration is still an important concept throughout. For example, someone's fan art becomes a glass half full and glass half empty situation between Kano and Yoru. Kano sees it as amazing that their group's mascot inspired someone to draw it, but Yoru, as the artist of the group, can't help but feel outdone by how well it's drawn. But then that changes into an inspiration to keep on creating anyways, and in a later episode, the group displays several of their fan arts in a live venue. There's also instances like how Mei, worried at one point that Kano might leave the group, sings horribly on stream to show just how much she wants her to stay, and her seiyuu sings so convincingly off-tune in such a loud and emotional way that I can't go without mentioning it. In general, I think that my favorite thing about this anime was both the cycle of inspiration and the process of creating songs and music videos that we get to see. I love when series show specific details about how things get made. I don't know how to explain it, I just love noticing little details like that. Speaking of noticing little details, did you know that the insert songs and the anime's ending theme were both done by the vocally producer 40m P? Yeah, that's right, I bet you didn't expect the vocally producer trivia at the end there, did ya? Gotta keep you on your toes. Girls Band Cry. Or Girls Band Cry. A brunette protagonist who wants to pursue her passion meets a musician with bright hair who recently stopped working with her famous group, and the former lights the latter's spark of inspiration anew as the two resolve to team up, which helps the latter try again at music. Hey, didn't we just cover this one? Okay, I'm kidding. I just wanted to do this joke because they aired in the same season and their first episodes are really funnily similar, but this and Jellyfish are entirely different shows. Talking seriously, Girls Band Cry took me a while to actually start watching, but I enjoyed it a lot. Its 3D animation is very smooth and expressive, while feeling so crisp and high quality, down to the details like the fabric of the characters' clothes or the intricate glimmers of light in their eyes. There's a good number of times where the animation moves around in a fun and cartoonish way as well. Though to talk about the actual characters, the whole band of 5 have their own unique traits and specific flaws, which makes them feel like a really strong unit altogether. And if you're wondering who my favorite character in the band is, then it's gotta be Subaru. I have an eye for silliness. I know a silly individual when I see one. No, but honestly, I think that her character is really interesting, especially with the information we get from episode 4 about how she had started to pretend to like acting since her grandmother trained her to be good at it, and how she now has a sort of deceptive politeness about her. Unlike Rupa, whose unbothered facade is second to none, Subaru is pretty quick to get annoyed during private banter with the band, and so this makes the scenes of her being stuck in the middle of her bandmates publicly arguing as she tries and fails to keep the peace pretty telling about her personality. She gets annoyed at them afterwards for causing a scene, as she's been raised not to do, but Nina gets annoyed at her in turn for not being as publicly open about her anger as she is, which, I mean, the degree to which Nina flies off the rails in public isn't exactly to be aspired to, but the two fall into different extremes in that regard. The writing has interesting bits of similarities here and there in that same kind of way, one of the more obvious ones being that their band, band, Togenashi Togeari, is closely tied to Nina's desire to prove she wasn't wrong during an incident of bullying she went through back in high school, and that the band doubles as an act of rebellion and a means of emotional catharsis for its members. For another example, there's the signature hand gesture Nina takes to doing after Momoka explains the obscenity of raising the middle finger to her, where she raises her pinkies instead. Later on, the popular band that turns into their rivals, Diamond Dust, starts using that unique hand gesture in a way that resembles how they had warped what used to be something Momoka had a part in into something that people probably now see as belonging to only them. There's other things I'd like to mention too, like how I like the t-shirts with the harsh labels in episode 5, and how I like Rupa's almost excessively passive disposition, and how episode 11's song is easily my favorite, all that kind of stuff. Or I could just like show you a really silly Subaru clip and call it a day. I couldn't really think of a good way to end this section, I'm gonna be so honest. Sentai Dai Shikaku, or Go Go Loser Ranger, or Ranger Reject. It has like 2 popular English versions of its title, I don't know why. I love talking about anime opening and ending themes throughout these yearly videos, and with this anime, they were my very first impressions of the show. It all started when I saw a TikTok of Nanawa Akari dancing along to the ending theme, and since it was obvious that she was also the person singing the official song, I immediately went to watch it, being a longtime fan of both her singing and the producer of the song Neru's music. The song had me hooked right away, along with the amazingly animated CG choreography. The dance was so fun, the expressive animation had me looping it over and over. So imagine my shock when I was told that the opening was also done by a Vocaloid producer, Tatsuya Kitani, and when I saw that it was just as amazing as the ending theme. Its heavy focus on the protagonist trying to fight his way through the world he's in to develop a sense of self while being looked down on by those around him had me, well, looping it over and over along with the ending theme. And so it's such an amazing opening and ending theme, I had no choice but to watch the actual show at this point. The show itself is a play on tokusatsu, and focuses on one of the several same-faced villains, called the Dusters. The first episode is a fun look into the weekly performative battle they have against the Rangers, most notably of all to me being this flashback scene where the Dusters are brainstorming. It was super entertaining seeing them all go back and forth while thinking of a monster to create for the battle, trying and failing to bounce design concepts off of each other. Our main character, Fighter D, thinks of a unique idea that symbolizes the Dusters having just as much of a winning chance as the Rangers do, despite the fact that they've been losing to them for over a decade, though he gets laughed at for thinking that they could win at all, and is consoled by Fighter F, who insists that he should probably go along with the path of least resistance. The episode continues on, very clearly setting up an infiltration plot where Fighter D intends to sneak his way into the Ranger training program in order to eventually defeat them from the inside. Things play out about how you'd expect for an infiltration plot. He gains a couple of connections with Rangers who are disillusioned by the system, and disguises his way in by assuming one of their identities. Though as it went on, I started to realize more and more that my favorite part of the show was growing more and more distant. I really can't stress enough how much I enjoyed that brainstorming scene in episode 1, and how much I looked forward to seeing the Dusters as a group more often. Even the opening and ending themes made them seem like they were going to be a constant presence as a unit in my eyes, with all the group skydiving and dancing they were doing in them. The show itself wasn't unclear about its intentions, though. There was zero doubt that it was setting up to be an infiltration plot, yet I still felt sad about it. Sure, I could put on my media analysis glasses and go, the show paints the Dusters as something the protagonist takes pride in being one of, while simultaneously something he resents the stagnation of. The Dusters are too afraid to step out of line due to the threat of the Rangers, and thus Fighter D is the focus of the story because of his refusal to play along with the stalemate any longer. We can even see this in the example of Fighter F, the only middle ground between the others' defeatism and Fighter D's resistance, being swiftly killed off for so much as going to look for Fighter D. This further emphasizes how drastically polarized the remaining Dusters are to Fighter D, and tells us subtly that we only have reason to further follow Fighter D's unique journey that's out to destroy the status quo that the others still abide by. Therefore, there is little reason to keep tabs on what the remaining Dusters are doing. Yeah, I could write an academic study about how clear the story is about not wanting to return to the Dusters for a long while, but it still makes me sad. I still miss them. Though, I mean, it's not like I didn't enjoy watching it at all. I like Yumiko, for example. The way that she ties her hair into a ribbon is ridiculous yet cute, and her air of always knowing things is fun to watch. It's interesting to see a character in this sort of plot full of keeping secrets have such knowing eyes. I like how offbeat and menacing the Red Keeper is, and how his callousness towards everyone around him is sort of comically exaggerated. I like that this God character is voiced by this very specific voice actor that always seems to get godly roles. That's really funny to me. I like the little preview segments at the end of each episode of these felt puppet plush, whatever these are, they're really cute. I like this little scene where Fighter D bashfully takes shapeshifting requests from Hibiki, since he's probably never had an eager audience for this talent he's had. Honestly, I like the entire dynamic between Fighter D and Hibiki in general, as short-lived as it's been so far. Speaking of short-lived, I also really liked Fighter F. His deep voice was really soothing, and his resigned yet sincere personality had me looking forward to seeing him more until he got killed in the second episode. I don't know, I'm kinda just rambling at this point, but besides those things, I wasn't entirely interested in watching the other characters that much. I still had fun watching it for the aforementioned reasons, but when they started introducing a bunch of Ranger trainees, I started to lose interest somewhat. And not getting to see the Duster face design that I liked so much since he was always in disguise didn't help matters. Though gradually through the stretch of time I didn't care much for, there were bits and pieces of an interesting internal conflict Fighter D started to have. He starts to doubt the indiscriminate killing that one of the boss monsters he encounters starts to do, and realizes that he doesn't stand in a position of unquestioned alliance with the monsters all the time. And since he's still out to eliminate the highest ranking rangers, he isn't fully allied with the rangers either, despite getting along with a few of the lower ranking ones. I think that these moments where he realizes and embraces his inability to fully commit to supporting either side in their conflict are probably the most thematically interesting to me, though I still do miss the Dusters. They show up again via flashback in the last episode, and I was pretty happy about that, but like, you know, despite knowing full well what the series is going for and why it doesn't especially need to constantly show us how the Dusters are doing, I can't help having enjoyed their presence in the beginning of the story so much. I was so desperate to see more of them as a unit that I skimmed through what's out of the manga beyond what the anime covers, and barely got any content of them from that either. I had to admit defeat and accept that there's just not much screen time for the Dusters as a unit beyond the beginning of the series, so, understandably, I've been rewatching the first couple of episodes a lot. I've also been rewatching the opening and ending theme a lot. That's right, it all comes back full circle. Woo! Shuumatsu torein doko e iku? Or, Train to the End of the World. I went into this anime completely blind. Like, I just picked the show at random to watch while making food, and yet the beginning of episode 1 threw me for a loop regardless. It wastes no time in jumping into its inciting incident of a schoolgirl being chosen at random to be the representative of a futuristic invention that warps the world into a weird state of being. Each town has some sort of irregularity about it now, seen initially in the town she moved away from now being one where everyone beyond a certain age turns into a randomized species of animal. And since she's now revealed to be missing, the series follows the adventure of her friend group trying to find her. The main character, determined to find her friend, happens upon a train that a local old man used to be the conductor of before the reality warp. When she puts the conductor hat on his head, he immediately reverts back to his real age and starts spouting angry complaints. His Seiyu's mile-a-minute line delivery sells the intended wackiness of the scene so well. I've listened to it over and over just to hear his amazing line reads. I can't play the audio in full, but just listen to how flawlessly he says these impossibly long sentences. He alludes to the fact that the greedy businessman from the beginning of the episode did some kind of unethical surgery on him, and turns back to the older version of himself afterwards. He can revert back to his actual age for only 5 minutes a day, which means the main friend group has to journey alone on the train he used to conduct. He agrees with the girls to communicate via Morse code through the train tracks during the times he's cohesive enough to give advice, and the first example of this in episode 2 is also a scene that I watched over and over. The sound effect of a little hammer tapping out Morse code, the impossibly fast and probably abridged version of their messages, and the punchline of his final message turning into nonsense to show that their time is up made this into a really fun scene. This whole Morse code communication thing turns into a way to drip feed information to the viewer and a running joke across the series. And a way to show off more of the objectively best character. Just like with Go-Go Loser Ranger, I had a weirdly similar thing happen, where my favorite characters were the ones that stayed behind while the main characters went on a journey. The train conductor man I liked, Zenjiro, mostly just appeared in the Morse code segments, so it was unfortunate to see so little of him. But like, I still gotta talk about where the main plot goes, right? The overarching plot of the anime is a setup where the friend group stops in town after town looking for their aforementioned missing friend. Since each town has been warped in a unique way, most of the show's run plays around at the creative potential to be had with such an open-ended concept, and lots of hijinks ensue. But I wasn't super interested in many of the town gimmicks, unfortunately, so the middle of the show felt like a slog to me. And like, again, just like with Go-Go Loser Ranger, I know what sort of theme the show's going for. The anime's going for a sort of, it's not about the destination, but about the journey. Yeah, I know, I get it. And again, it's not like I didn't enjoy this or that across the middle portion of the series. The Mushroom Town and the town where mangakas controlled everything were fun, but through the majority of their town visits, I found myself not caring and just wanting them to get to their destination faster. The finale was neat though. I like the antagonist from way back in the beginning of the series that reappears here, that greedy businessman. He's written to be unapologetically greedy and evil, with his name literally being Poison Pontaro. And so it was fun to see that play into the finale where he tries to keep the friends apart for as long as possible. Though it ends with the friends properly reuniting and making amends with each other, and the world going back to almost normal in a fitting sort of way, given the whole theme of change the series likes using. But I really would have liked to see more of my goat Zenjiro. The most we see directly of his past is through a really short flashback with the scientist he knew and the menace to society Pontaro. Pontaro tried to silence the two, who were the only ones opposed to a secret plan via unethical surgery, and Zenjiro took the hit so that the scientist could escape safely. And even though this is the only scene of the show of these three characters together, I think that they're really fun and interesting. It's super weird that I watched 2 shows this year that were a mixed bag for me because of my weird attachment to specific characters that were written to be infrequent. It's such a confusing phenomenon, but hopefully those long explanations made sense somehow. Maybe they were a bit too long-winded, but both instances of it baffled me, so I felt the need to explain myself like this. Oshinoko Season 2. Or Oshinoko Season 2. I don't want to write an introductory sentence. Here are a couple of choices in direction and editing of this season's adaptation that I want to call attention to. The first one is within this flashback scene here, focused on a young Akane who looks up to the child actress Kana. A casting staff member walks by and mistakes Akane for Kana as he goes to get a drink from the nearby vending machine. He tells her that the audition she's here for is predetermined, that she was already cast as the role before the auditions even started, and the statement is paired with the visual of the drink he chose being displayed as sold out. And immediately after this, the sound of the metal can dropping in the machine is accompanied by a hard cut to Akane's confused face. The manga had the same vending machine in this part, but the anime changed its inclusion into something that complements the feeling of the scene a bit more. Using it in such a subtle yet creative way gives us a better feeling of Akane's heart sinking when she hears that Kana might be associated with an underhanded audition process.
かなちゃんを選ぶことはもう決まってるから。これ
Another choice in direction and editing that sticks out to me, though in a sort of different way, is the music video in the final episode. B. Komachi had taken a while to record for their new music video, but partway through the long process, Ruby sees something dramatic, and the bright star in her eye turns to a darker one. And since some of the music video parts had already been recorded before that happened, we get this sort of intentionally off-putting inconsistency in the final product, where the shots recorded after the incident show Ruby with the scarier eyes. Not only is it a clever display of the long process of filming and editing something, but it gives the ultra cutesy song a bit of a creepy feeling. This attention to detail had me watching the music video over and over when it first aired. I watched it so many times that I noticed that the shot of them filming the dance part in episode 12 is actually a bit inconsistent as to what the actual choreography is. See, at the beginning they turn around in a different order for some reason, and later on when Ruby is supposed to split from the others, they have Memcho do it instead, which I'm pretty sure is some kind of mistake, though probably kind of a small one, and I'm getting off topic anyways. But the other things I have to say about this season feel sort of obvious. I could say that I liked the conflict with the scriptwriter and mangaka, or that I really enjoyed the focus on Melt and how he fights through the embarrassment of being known as a horrible actor and uses it to fuel his method acting, or that the method acting scenes in general were adapted spectacularly, or that Akane and Kana have a really strong back and forth dynamic that works well in both comedic and serious scenes, or that the opening is amazing. But even though I believe all those statements, I've seen them said a million times over online, so like, yeah, sure, this guy really is looking blue today, you know? Also, for anyone still curious, yes, Memcho is still my favorite character. I like her speech about YouTube subscribers, it's very true and real and accurate of her. And her Seiyu's voice is still really satisfying to me. I don't know how to explain it, I think it's something about how she sounds when doing plosives. Shikanoko noko noko koshi tan tan. Or, my dear friend Noko-tan. Oh, how do I start talking about this? I like the basic concept of the show on paper, as I've enjoyed these kinds of lighthearted comedies before, but after watching just the first episode, my reaction was a bit lukewarm. And gradually it started to lose me, and I had trouble understanding why. Like, I just kept watching and watching as I felt like almost none of its jokes were landing for me. I feel like something that really weighed it down, in my opinion, is that it kept falling back on a couple of overly repetitive jokes. Said jokes fall into one of these two categories. 1. Shikanoko does some crazy deer shenanigans, and everyone around her is easily impressed. Noko-tan sees this and frequently retorts, confused as to how everyone is so nonchalant about what's going on. 2. One or several characters get overly dramatic about something in a way that's meant to be laughably undeserved and out of nowhere. Like, the joke is that the drama is not supposed to be happening. Both of these setups are solid ideas for jokes, but not when they're used so often in such a copy-paste way. Especially the second setup. Like, it's so easy to execute the concept of a character getting overly dramatic for humor that lands well if there's a proper setup, but when this anime does it, it feels transparently try-hard. Not only that, but the characters didn't really interest me either. There were characters I felt like I could conceptually like, but even they weren't especially endearing. I just liked their presence a bit more than the other characters. And that's not even mentioning these two characters, whose gimmicks were always downright painful to watch. It's sort of a weird feeling to sit here and explain how a comedy series didn't make me laugh, but that's sort of the whole point of comedies in the first place, you know? Though that feels like one of the biggest complaints I have with it in a way. The fact that it fully invests itself in its comedy, which fell flat for me. Nearly everything felt in service to some kind of punchline, but said punchlines ended up feeling repetitive or just somehow boring, so I'm left without much to appreciate about it. It almost feels like it's trying to strike a weird balance between the no rules allowed comedy style of something like Pop Team Epic and the relatively more grounded slice of life feel that something like Nichijou has. But in trying to do so, its lack of regard for consistency in any sort of character building, despite its attempt to at least be somewhat grounded in reality, just ends up feeling like it's trying to have its cake and eat it too. Instead of feeling like the series is making any sort of attempt to set any sort of rules for its semi-grounded setting so that it could build off of those to make jokes off of, the setting contradicts its own setups and lampshades its own inconsistencies, yet still asks us to believe in its grounded aspects regardless. Like, instead of being able to watch how these characters' personalities naturally bounced off of each other's in both an understandable and funny way, it felt more like the show was staring me down and constantly trying too hard to be funny at the expense of everything it sets up. The show felt unconfident and meandering, as if I was watching a stand-up comedian desperately flip through a joke book in real time, which is a letdown because I was interested in this series in concept, and there were a few little moments and small jokes I did find charming, but most of those were already being turned into memes online anyways, so it felt pointless to have sat through the rest of it. Most of my time with this series was spent sitting through jokes that just weren't landing. The worst thing a comedy series can be is boring, and that's what this ended up being. Here are some comedy series I actually do like, for a better frame of reference. This isn't me saying that this anime should have tried to be like any of these examples, by the way. This is more just to give a better understanding of comedy series I personally find funny, so that I'm not seen as like some kind of grouch or something. Senpai wa Otokonoko. Or, actually that last word of the title is really tough to translate from Japanese since it's more of an umbrella term for several things, so I just recommend calling it by the Japanese name. A love triangle with a gender non-conforming character at the center of it is a unique setup that roped me in right away. On one end there's Aoi, a bubbly and well-meaning girl, on another is Ryuji, a cautious and protective boy, and the person they both crush on is Makoto, who's still figuring out their gender identity. Like, the series has a pretty big arc about it, and I know that's getting ahead of myself, but the eventual answer is what defines how I'm addressing Makoto, so I don't know, wall of text. Anyways, back to the topic of how I found out about this show. I saw a few cute clips floating around online that both established the aforementioned love triangle and used the chibi art style that I found endearing. It's a super common thing for anime as a medium to draw its characters as chibis for a handful of silly moments, but this series uses that kind of chibi style for what must have been a whole quarter of its runtime. And since it's an adaptation, it's lifting that style from its source material that does it just as often, and translates the charm of that art style pretty well into animation. That frequent use of this silly little chibi art style is what got me to watch the show, since just a few clips were enough to make me curious as to how the show itself went. I enjoyed the lighthearted antics that played out in its first 2 episodes, but the opening theme pretty clearly hinted that the series was in for something more serious as well. Its lyrics seemed to be very on point for themes it'd get into later on, and that paired with its beautiful visuals had gotten me even more interested. And by the time I got to episode 3, the dynamics between the trio started to flesh out some more. Aoi makes a point to have an open crush on Makoto, and actively encourages them to express themselves freely at any chance she gets. Ryuji, on the other hand, despite also wanting Makoto to present however they please, is worried about the social stigma that entails, and takes a hands-off sort of approach where he refrains from giving biased advice in fear of coming off as overbearing. It creates an interesting push and pull between finding one's sense of self versus repressing and pushing it back down. Even their backstories factor into this, with Aoi feeling a strong drive to find something she likes a lot, and Ryuji feeling apprehensive about being seen as weird or creepy for liking what he likes. It's a well-written dynamic that works its way pretty well into the love triangle, but it doesn't end with just establishing that theme, it goes on to further build on its characters as their relationships with each other grow and change. Throughout the series, all 3 of them develop strong connections with each other, yet also feel as if they themselves are a sort of odd one out among the other 2 every now and again because of their individual situations and surroundings. For example, we get to see each of their family situations, and how that plays a part in each of their progress towards self-actualization. Most interesting of all to me was when Makoto went to visit a distant relative who was also gender non-conforming, and had been estranged from the family because of that. Despite being endlessly happy about experiencing a cozy and accepting home environment, Makoto is told of the concept of giving one thing up for another, and chooses to return home as a sort of inversion of what their relative had gone through. Makoto's mother had been very close-minded about gender norms, but both Makoto and their father had started talking to her about it more openly, and she starts to be more relaxed about the idea of Makoto presenting femininely. Aoi and Ryuji have their own circumstances as well, with Aoi's parents having been absent for most of her upbringing, and Ryuji unsure about what he wants to do in the future. There's big decisions that each of the 3 of them have to make, from future career choices, to which of their guardians will have custody over them, to whether they want to attend college or not. And the decision of who they're in love with weaves its way into parts of that as well. I think that the scenes where the characters are pondering to themselves about that were pretty neat. For example, there's an interesting scene with all 3 of them watching the same romantic program on TV at different parts, each of the specific parts of it relating to what each of them are thinking about at the moment. Though the scenes of them interacting with each other are probably what I like the best. They complement each other's personalities really well. What else is there? Oh yeah, fun fact. Both the opening and ending theme are done by a Vocaloid producer named Kujira, which I'd assume just had to be intentional with how much whales are relevant to Aoi's character. And like, how cool is that? Just imagine being contacted like, hey, your name has whale in it, and we got a character that thinks about whales a lot. Do you want to perhaps make the opening and ending theme? And it turned out absolutely amazing. Like, I know I talk about the opening and ending themes a lot on these videos, but I can't go without mentioning any standout examples for each show. It's who I am. Anyways, point being, I really liked watching this anime, and I really liked those little chibis. Just look at them, little creatures. Kamierabi Season 2. Or GodApp Season 2. If you saw last year's video, then your immediate thought is probably, hey, wait a second, didn't you have a bad time with Season 1? Why are you talking about this again? And my answer is that it's complicated. I'm in way too deep if my thoughts on season 1 didn't already give that away. Since season 1 left off on a ginormous cliffhanger, and since these are technically 2 cores, with this second one meant to be the proper finale to the story, I had no choice but to continue watching. And now at this point of this year's video script, I'm realizing that wow, I'm summarizing these anime a lot more than I did last year. Does that mean I have to summarize GodApp as well? I mean, like, for consistency's sake, and since the story is so complex, you know, I'll try to keep it brief, I swear. The first season was about the main character, Goro, among several other characters, being told by a mysterious app called the GodApp to fight in a battle royale until one person is left, with the last remaining survivor being promised godhood. Goro encounters most of the participants along the way, battles happen, and various circumstances result in him using a power to erase everyone in the area he's in, before Ryo uses her power on him and the season ends soon after. This second season is about how most of the main characters are doing after a 12-year time skip, where Goro is now gone from both reality and most of their memories. The battle royale that had been inactive during the time skip starts back up again through Lau trying to bring Goro back to life. This is Lau, by the way, the little mascot thing from season 1, it's a long story. She ends up working with this newly introduced generic-looking kid named Echo, who gets involved in everything through her own curiosity and convenient happenstance. Despite the fact that in season 1, the battle royale was a total free-for-all, season 2's continuation of it happens through randomly assigned one-on-one battles. During one of these battles, most of the people present start suddenly dying, and the world starts to end, but Akitsu shows up to reverse time back to earlier that day. We learn that Ryo had started an organization to try saving the world. We learn that Echo is a child of that mysterious Higaki man we've been seeing every now and again. We learn that Akitsu had jumped here from the past before having been killed in season 1, then the world starts ending again. Chika comes back from having been comatose this whole season, Ryo starts dying in someone's kill, Lau and Kill force Higaki into a portal, and then we see those three talking in another world. Higaki finally explains some more about himself, as we see a flashback of him and a totally generic gray man. Now see me, I knew who that generic man was. What are the odds that this is like the Ryo and Kyo's father? He has the same stupid polo shirt! Whose house are we in? Whose house are we in? There they are! This guy is Ryo and Kyo's father, who despite being the reason that the GodApp is able to like doom the entire world, and despite having enough relevance to be a major part of 2 episodes throughout the show, has a generic grayed out character design. Oh, did I sort of breeze over that part? Oops. Yeah, this guy enables the GodApp to literally doom the world. It kinda just happens. And he explains the concept of creating an illusionary world in order for humanity to avoid the sudden doomsday. So, surprise. Everything we'd seen up until now had been taking place in an illusionary world created by smartphones. The folks in the illusionary world flee with Keita upon said world starting to crumble. He takes them to a facility that powers the AI app stuff or something, and unexpectedly Echo wanders in, admits to being God, and retcons Keita out of existence. So, double surprise, the generic kid introduced this season was actually God this whole time. She monologues to everyone for a while about how she wrote everything, and knows everything, and controls everything, but then gives them agency, and they team up to build to bear Goro back to life. Goro casually starts rewriting God Echo's story. She gets portaled away to other characters who each get a turn to say a cool line. They say that Goro's the best and that he can do anything he puts his mind to, and then God Echo goes back to him and freaks out some more. Lol's a book. Goro defeats God Echo. She entrusts the world she wrote to him, and he gets chosen as God, even though the battle seemed to be over. He's told to make a wish. He rewrites the world or something. Lal gets reborn as his younger sister again. He passes by every relevant character as a probably maybe happy AU version of themselves. Then he sees a cat from season 1 that he previously failed to save and does a Kagero Days reference, and then everyone gathers around him as he either passes out or dies. I can't tell. The end. In my personal opinion, I feel like the finale of the series kind of started to go off the rails at some point. The concept of characters in a story meeting an in-universe god who also functions as their author is interesting, but the way this story got to that point felt more like it was written into a corner, which sucks to say because it's tough to tell how thought out the story was in advance, and there's just enough plausible details that make it sort of seem predetermined, but there's also a lot of gaps that the story left in the way it beelines to its finale. And the thing about this finale is that starting from the train scene that revealed that the world we had known this whole time was fake, and lasting until the very end of the show, there are an abundance of silly little screenshots I'd taken along the way that I'd like to show you. Here's me when I watch GodApp. Here's me when I try to understand GodApp. Here's me trying to figure out what's going on in GodApp. Here's me after a new episode of GodApp. Here's me trying to explain GodApp. Here's me when I think about the process of rewriting this part of the script about GodApp. Here's me when writing this part of the script about GodApp. Jokes aside, the thing about all these screenshots is that they're part of a bigger point I want to make. The show's finale has a lot of lines that sound completely meta. They happen often enough to go beyond the in-universe context, and instead gave me a feeling of intentional lampshading. GodApp as a whole has a very intricate narrative, as I just described, but it also has a countless number of instances I've been noticing of what seem like plot holes. And that's not me trying to create complaints from nothing. It's been a process of me genuinely trying to engage with the details it had set up and running into a lot of dead ends as a result. I'm pretty openly a fan of series that are really complex, and the whole appeal of them is how much you can look into and theorize about them. Good complex series are those that set up a lot of things, but also string them together to make sense to the point that any gaps can be plausibly filled in by fan theories. GodApp, on the other hand, sets up countless plot threads and important bits of lore, but ducks and dodges its way out of stringing them together, so thinking about it excessively ends up feeling like I've stumbled into an area still under construction despite having been led there by the narrative itself. If the story was just a simple battle royale or something, then that'd be cool. If the story was a complex and winding narrative that made sense upon thinking about it more, that'd also be cool. But GodApp instead seems to have bitten off more than what it could chew, and felt like it was suddenly backing away from its own complexity at its very end. Hopefully this is a justifiable frustration for me to have. It feels the same as someone pitching an idea for a story and then suddenly going, no, it's dumb, never mind, this is just nonsense anyways, after they've already gotten you invested in it. And it's like, I'm sat down here 2 seasons in, why are you being meta in what feels like such a self-conscious way in your finale? That finale really cemented my feelings about this show. I was bothered by how it started to sort of shrink away from itself, and that discontent came from a place of having been invested in it. I wouldn't have felt that frustration if I never cared about the series, but as evidenced from my extensive thoughts on these 2 seasons, I had a whole lot to say about it. As much as I like to joke about how confusing and nonsensical the show can get, it's done from a weird kind of fondness. Instead of downright hating it, I found myself obsessed with dissecting as many of its intricacies as possible. It's not bad in the way that I talked about my experience with Shikanoko, where I was kinda just bored with it. GodApp was, I think it could be described as camp. It took itself so seriously for most of its run, and yet the viewing experience leaned more towards the silly side. But I'm saying that affectionately, if that makes sense. Am I making sense with all this? Is this too wordy? Shortly put, I think that my relationship with this show is complicated, and can't simply be boiled down to thinking that it's bad. Just as I said in the previous video, it has so much going on that it feels wrong to dismiss it as just being some weird CG show or whatever. I think it deserved this much yapping about it. It also deserves another round of walls of text on screen about stuff I think is confusing about it. This is my way of showing that I wasn't just passively watching the show, I was actively keeping track of what was going on to the best of my ability. This is me engaging with this complex series and explaining my several long-winded questions about it as a way of showing my work. So please enjoy these walls of text, complete with some music and a timestamp if you'd rather skip over it for some reason. Alright, that's about it for the walls of text. There were a whole lot more than there were last year, but in my defense, the first season is much smaller scale relative to this one. It's kind of funny to look at last year's section about the first season, since that thing I said about contrived setups to sort of inconsistent plot twists just ended up being more and more true. We got some major answers in this final half of the anime's story, but in the series' usual way of leaving lots of questions up in the air until the very end of its run. I sort of wish it didn't try to shrink away from its own complex narrative in its finale, but GodApp as a whole was an oddly hilarious experience, and in the wise words of Goro himself,
せめて笑い飛ばしてほしい。
高校に行ったら女がいなかった話. Or, how I attended an all-guys mixer. I feel like it was just obvious that I was gonna end up liking this anime. I'm always a fan of androgynous character design, so it was a total delight when I heard of this anime's concept. So here's how it starts. 3 guys meet up with 3 girls at a mixer, but despite their expectations, the girls are all dressed up as guys because of a cross-dressing bar that they work at. They pair up with each other pretty naturally, and a charming and simple sort of sliding scale of reactions among the guys begins to manifest. On one extreme there's Hagi, who's pretty conflicted about Kohaku causing his heart to flutter even when she's dressed as a guy. And on another there's Asagi, who's just there for the vibes. Like, he has a permanent cat face about him, he's completely fine either way. And then in the middle there's Tokiwa, who has a pretty normal level of embarrassment that he's not as prince-like as the girls are. It makes for really cute dynamics between the pairs, whether that be mutual embarrassment, one-sided embarrassment, or just absolute vibes. Can you tell I like these two the best? Like, just look how easily they click with each other's hobbies and interests. It's so fucking cute. Though I also have to mention that I really like Suo as well, for reasons that might be a little too visually obvious. Actually, if I'm being totally honest, I like all of the characters and pairings a lot. They have a unique way of balancing each other out in the progression of their relationships. In Suo and Tokiwa's case, Tokiwa takes a while to notice Suo's advances due to thinking that she's out of his league, and she herself sometimes plays into her at-work persona instead of being more direct about her feelings for him. In Kohaku and Hagi's case, Hagi tries to understand his romantic orientation, and Kohaku worries about overstepping and prying too much into his personal life in the hypothetical case that he might not want to share. And there's also some back and forth confusion about hearing specific words out of context, which ends up lost in translation a lot of the time. It's a whole thing. In Fuji and Asagi's case, they have the smoothest sailing out of the 3 pairings by far. Since Asagi's so relaxed and accepting, Fuji's able to ask for his help in working on her manga, with the closest thing to a problem being that she thinks he'll be off-put by it because of its mature content. But he helps her work on it anyways, and he tags along to help her out at a doujinshi convention. Later on, he sees her not dressed as a guy for the first time, and she asks if he's off-put, and he just smiles and says that he likes her in any appearance, and I need a minute. These two are at the scene of the crime a majority of the time. I'd been losing my mind over this show. They're so very relaxed around each other, they're so very sweet towards each other, and they've basically just kind of infected my brain at this point. But I can't talk about only the 2 of them. Again, all 3 of the pairings are really great. Don't let my personal bias cause you to overlook the others. The romance in this series is really delightful throughout its entire run. Even if some of the characters themselves take a while to properly define their feelings for each other as romantic, the pairings are obvious right from the start, and that means that in a way, the series settles you down into a relaxing display of cute moments between the pairings. The show had me internally screaming with all the heart-fluttering scenes and romantic happenings and sweet moments of the characters bonding practically every episode. It felt like the absolute ideal of a slice-of-life romance, where the relationships progress through lots of scenes of the characters appreciating each other's company in their daily lives. There's also a good number of moments where characters either ask each other for relationship advice, or where they try to help each other out. It's really cute. I'm not sure if I'm explaining its appeal well enough with all of this, but I was looking forward to it every single week. It was a complete mood booster. It puts so much value into its day-to-day situations, its characters are also very down-to-earth and enjoyable, its romantic happenings are so heartwarming, but at some point words just start to fail me and I dissolve into, look at them, oh, look how cute they are. And now it's time for the miscellaneous anime part, where I talk about series I don't have as many thoughts on, not because they're bad, but just because sometimes it's tough for me to formulate as many thoughts about them. I don't know how to explain it, let's go. Dandadan was a fun watch, though sort of another case where people have talked about it so much that I find myself without much of substance to say. Like, pretty much anything I can think of has probably been said dozens of times over online. I'm sure it'd still be genuine coming from me since I'm the one writing all this, but I like having unique things to say, so I got nothing. Like, what do you want me to say? That my biggest opinion on it is that I think the romance is cute and that Okurin and Momo felt realistically juvenile and awkward about their insecurities? Because everyone else thinks the same. Do you want me to say that the English dub goes above and beyond in both casting and line delivery? Because that's been said too. Do you want me to mention tiny details like that Okurin drew the happy cat on his notebook? I'm afraid I'm too late to the punch. I just can't think of anything unique to say about it that hasn't been said before. Like, I don't know, I got nothing. Next up, the Hanako-kun spinoff. It got another 4 episodes, and I don't have a whole lot of things to say about them either. I'm really happy that the Midnight Convenience Store skit was adapted, since it's one of my favorites in the spinoff by far. It subtly explores a few traits of Teru and Aoi's characters through a mundane shopping trip, and the punchline of Teru wanting to try a DIY candy maker tops it off well. My other favorite skits of this season were any involving Tsuchigomori, and he surprisingly got a lot of justice in the small window of episodes. They adapted 2 whole skits where he's the focus, and I have no choice but to give my thanks to whichever Tsuchigomori fan on staff staff made that decision. Not only that, but the last episode was yet another Halloween AU, which yet again was right on time for Halloween this year. Though with the new season finally on the horizon, there's more to look forward to, both in the form of the Picture Perfect arc and in the form of Clock Keepers. Next up is Love Live Superstar Season 3. Yeah, Love Live Superstar somehow got a third season, despite the norm being 2 in a movie, and it feels kinda tacked on, I'm gonna be so honest. Due to circumstances that sort of seem to be backtracking the progress Margaret seemed to be making near the end of season 2, the season starts with Kanon being instructed to supervise Margaret and being a school idol. This leads to them splitting from Liella, getting a third member in the form of Natsumi's little sister, who's now a character all of a sudden, and the very boring adventures of Kanon babysitting the two. Every once in a while, the season would snap its fingers and say, hey, look, you like this character from the earlier seasons, right? Here's a focus episode for them. But besides that, the season was an endurance test of how many times I could tolerate hearing Margaret declare that Liella is the enemy. And because of that weird vendetta, the groups stay separated, and doing so benches the majority of Liella for a long stretch of time until the groups finally talk things out a bit more and perform together. And at the end of that performance, they ask the crowd which of their two groups should progress to the Love Live, and the entire student body is like, can you please just merge already? We got everyone to sign a petition and agreement. Please stop pretending to be enemies. And they finally merge groups. Basically, most of the season was focused on Kanon's babysitting adventures, and I get the general idea of teamwork and such that they were trying to do, but it felt redundant since we already had a whole season's worth of integrating new underclassmen into the group. And so watching half a season of these two even newer underclassmen being needlessly stubborn about not wanting to merge the groups together for a while was just tiring. I don't know, I didn't really like it. What else? I need to return to A Sign of Affection. I started it and it was very much the kind of pleasant viewing experience that I tend to save for a rainy day, and I've yet to return to it, but I do intend to return to it, let that be known. It's very cute and it's very sweet and I do intend to return to it, don't worry. I just haven't finished it, so I don't have much to say about it right now, so we're moving on. And finally, on this brief list of miscellaneous anime, I watched the movie adaptation of Look Back.
やつがいるなんて。なんで漫画描くのやめちゃったんですか？全巻成績しないですね。いつまで漫画描いてんの？ずーっと描いてんの。ちゃん、部屋から出してくれてありがとう。すごいです、それ。描いててよかったできるよって思えた。できるようにする。無理だよ。どえ、上手くなりたいもん。
I think I just got hit with the sudden urge to draw some more. I'm gonna go do that. But thanks for watching, by the way. I don't know how this year's video got to be so long, but thank you for sticking with it throughout anyways. I don't know. Bye.